During the toast on my parents' anniversary, my father raised his glass and said, "We are lucky to have such a wonderful son-in-law." He looked directly at my sister's husband and completely ignored mine. My husband looked at his plate. I didn't stay silent, and what I said shocked everyone. My father raised his glass, smiled across the table, and said the sentence that ended everything. "We are lucky to have such a wonderful son-in-law." He turned directly toward my sister's husband. Everyone followed his gaze, laughed politely, nodded, clinked their glasses. No one looked at Eric. Not once. My husband sat right beside me, and it was like he wasn't even there. I didn't toast. I didn't smile. I looked at my father, then at my mother, and then at my sister. I waited for someone, anyone, to notice. They didn't. They just kept on with the performance like it was a play they'd rehearsed. So I stood up. I didn't clear my throat or tap my glass. I just said it. "I'm tired of this. Of all of you." The silence was instant and total. It wasn't a dramatic pause, it wasn't for effect. I just didn't know how to keep pretending I was okay with the way they treated my husband like furniture. Not even bad furniture. Just invisible. It had been going on for years. Ever since I married Eric, my father barely acknowledged him. And when he did, it was backhanded. Jokes about his blue-collar charm, or little comments about how some people don't need college degrees. Todd, on the other hand, could do no wrong. Every time he visited, my dad rolled out the red carpet. Talked about him like he was some kind of visionary genius. But what really pushed me over the edge happened earlier that night. Before the toast, Todd had handed my parents their gift. A sleek little envelope wrapped in gold ribbon. Inside was a luxury cruise voucher. 2 weeks. Italy, Spain, Greece. My mom almost cried. They fawned over it like he'd given them the moon. Then they opened ours. A restored photo of their wedding day, one they'd long thought was ruined forever. Eric had spent weeks tracking down someone who could recover it. He stayed up late fixing the damaged edges, retouching by hand. My dad barely glanced at it. Said, "Oh, that's nice." Then moved on. And just before the toast, I overheard Todd talking to someone near the bar. He didn't know I was walking past. He laughed and said something like, "I just pretend to care about this stuff. It's exhausting talking to that old man." That old man was my father. But my father didn't know that. He just stood there during the toast, holding his glass up to the man who openly mocked him behind his back. And dismissed the man who respected him enough to preserve the memory of his wedding day. So yeah. I stood up. I said I was tired of pretending. And then I dropped a truth on that table that shattered the night into pieces. No one told me to sit down. No one even blinked. I think they were too stunned. I wasn't the dramatic one. That was always Caroline. I was the fixer. The peacekeeper. The one who knew how to smooth things over with a smile and a soft joke. But not tonight. I looked at Todd first. "You know what's funny? You play the perfect son-in-law in this house. You hand out expensive gifts, you call my dad, sir, like we're in some country club commercial. But just half an hour ago you were standing by the bar calling him a stupid old man." My mother gasped. She actually gasped like we were in a soap opera. Todd's face drained so fast I thought he might pass out. "You didn't know I was behind you, did you? You had no idea I heard you. You said, 'I just pretend to care about this stuff.' It's exhausting talking to that old man." Now everyone was staring at him. Even my father. The expression on his face flickered for the first time that night. Confusion. Hurt. And just a touch of realization. I turned to my sister. "You've known. You've heard him talk like that before. You've just smiled through it as long as he kept buying you handbags and beachfront hotel stays. You let him mock the man who raised us because it was convenient." Caroline looked ready to say something, but she didn't. She just stared at me like she didn't recognize me. And then I turned to my father. "You talk about respect like it's earned. But you hand it out like party favors to whoever has the biggest bank account. You've never once said you were proud of Eric. You act like he's beneath you just because he fixes engines instead of pushing numbers around on a screen." I saw my husband finally look up. He didn't say a word. But he didn't look away either. Eric has more honor in one finger than that guy has in his entire Gucci wardrobe. I gestured at Todd without even looking at him. My mother started to say something like, "Julia, that's enough." But I cut her off. "No. It's not enough. It's never been enough for you. He's never been enough for you. And I've spent the last 6 years hoping that maybe one day you'd see him for who he is. But tonight made it clear. He never will." There was no yelling. No one tried to stop me. But something was breaking in that moment, something I couldn't put back together. And then I said something I didn't even plan. This came out. This is the last dinner we ever attend as a family. You could feel the silence sink into the table like a stone. Heavy. Awkward. Familiar. Caroline opened her mouth but couldn't find words fast enough. Todd was staring down at his hands, like maybe if he looked sorry enough, the floor wouldn't open up under him. My father just sat there, still holding his champagne glass, like his brain hadn't caught up with what was happening. I wasn't bluffing. And I think that's what scared them. Eric didn't say anything. He stood up beside me. Not out of panic or confusion. Just support. The kind that doesn't need to be said out loud. We're done pretending this is a family when it's a performance. And if the only kind of son-in-law you're proud of is one who lies to your face, mocks you behind your back and buys your love in the form of overpriced vacations, then maybe you deserve each other. I looked at my mother for a long moment. She always played innocent in these situations, hands folded, eyes wide, like she wasn't just as guilty for staying quiet, for letting it happen over and over. You know how he talks about you too, don't you? Or do you just not care anymore? Her mouth moved slightly, but she didn't say anything. Not denial. Not defense. Just nothing. And I think that was the final confirmation I needed. Eric and I walked toward the gate. No one followed. I didn't expect them to. I glanced over my shoulder one last time, half expecting my dad to get up, say something, stop us. But he didn't. He just sat there like a man trying to figure out how the script fell apart. We got into the car and for a few minutes we just sat there. I could still hear the clinking of silverware behind us, the murmur of conversations picking back up, already moving on. As if we hadn't just burned the whole thing down. And that's when I realized something that hit me harder than I expected. They didn't believe I'd actually leave. They thought I'd get emotional, say something dramatic, then show up next Thanksgiving with a casserole like nothing happened. But not this time. This time the door was closing for good. And they hadn't even noticed how long it had been cracked open. The first week after the dinner no one called. Not my mother. Not my father. Not even Caroline. It was like I'd been surgically removed from the family photo album. One clean cut. And honestly, it told me everything I needed to know. Because when someone really cares, they don't let silence sit between you for that long. Eric didn't say much about it. He never did. But I saw how he carried himself differently. Like he wasn't bracing for another quiet humiliation every time we saw them. He didn't say, I told you so, didn't act smug. He just, relax. And I hadn't realized how much he'd been holding his breath around them until he finally exhaled. 2 weeks later we got a card in the mail from my parents. No return address, just our names printed neatly on the envelope. Inside was a photo of them on their cruise. Smiling. Posing in front of some glittering blue sea. Nothing handwritten. Just the photo. No note. No apology. No attempt to talk. I showed it to Eric. He looked at it then handed it back. That's your answer right there, he said. I put it in the trash. Then the weird part started. The messages from extended family. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years. An aunt who barely remembered my birthday but suddenly had a lot to say. Heard you made a scene. Maybe you should have handled it privately. Your dad is still your dad. They weren't mad I stood up for Eric. They were mad I broke the illusion. The one where everything's fine and polite and expensive and unspoken. That illusion is sacred in families like mine. The kind that care more about appearances than actual connection. But the worst message came from Caroline. She sent a voice memo. Not a call, not a text. A voice memo, like she couldn't even stomach a conversation. You didn't have to blow everything up. You always think you're the moral authority, but you embarrassed mom and dad in front of everyone. You should have just pulled me aside if you had something to say about Todd. That was the moment I knew she didn't care that Todd mocked our father. She only cared that I said it out loud. In public. Where other people could hear. That whole side of the family was built on secrets and performances. And I just pulled the curtain back. Caroline's voice memo stayed unopened on my phone for 2 days. I'd read the transcription preview. That was enough. You didn't have to blow everything up. You always do this. You made it worse than it needed to be. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have anything to say, I had too much. And I knew how it would go. She'd twist it, smooth it over, bring up how Todd meant well, how dad was old-fashioned, how mom's anxiety couldn't handle conflict. That it wasn't the right time to say something. It never was. It never would be. Then came the text from my mom. One line, no punctuation. We didn't raise you to behave like that. I stared at it for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it proved she hadn't listened at all. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She wasn't trying to understand. She just wanted to remind me I'd broken the rules of the game. I embarrassed the family in front of their little audience. That was unforgivable. Not the years of subtle cruelty toward Eric. Not the way Todd used them like props between business deals. Just me saying the quiet part out loud. I realized then no one was going to say the thing I needed to hear. Not from that side of the family. Eric and I stayed quiet about it for a while. We didn't analyze it to death, didn't have long heart-to-hearts every night. We didn't need to. The air in our house had shifted. Lighter. More real. But one night, sitting outside with paper plates of leftover pasta and a cheap bottle of wine, Eric finally asked me something. Do you ever regret what you said? I didn't answer right away. Not because I wasn't sure, but I wanted to be careful. Precise. Because he mattered too much to answer carelessly. I only regret not saying it sooner. He nodded slowly and didn't say anything else. We didn't need to fill the silence. That's the thing about peace. It's quiet but never uncomfortable. But peace doesn't mean silence from the outside world. A few weeks later we started getting the calls. My dad's cousin called me, a man I hadn't seen since I was 20, just to say I was being harsh. My aunt sent me a Facebook message. Your mom cries every day. Is that what you wanted? Even an old neighbor messaged Eric's business page and said something about how family is more important than pride. It wasn't concern. It was pressure. They weren't checking in, they were circling wagons around my parents' image. Trying to nudge me back into place. But I'd already said no. And I meant it. I didn't post anything online. I didn't correct anyone's version of the story. I just stopped showing up. No phone calls. No visits. No holiday texts. I let the silence speak. At first I thought maybe anyone, might reach out to really talk. Not to guilt trip, not to scold, but to ask how we were. Why it hurt. Why we left. But they never did. Until one night in October, long after the air had turned cold and the last of the tomatoes in our backyard had withered. Someone knocked on our door at 10:42 p.m. Eric was already asleep. I checked the window confused. No one ever came that late. No one from the family had visited in over 4 months. I opened the door. It was my father. Not in a suit. Not holding flowers. No smile. Just standing there in the dark, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who'd seen something he couldn't unsee. I didn't say anything. I just stood there waiting. He took a breath. And the first thing he said was not what I expected. I need to tell you something about Todd. I didn't move. I didn't invite him in. I just stood in the doorway barefoot, the cold creeping up from the porch. He looked smaller somehow, not in size but in presence. Like whatever certainty he'd always carried had slipped out of his hands. He repeated it. I need to tell you something about Todd. I crossed my arms. Not to be defensive, I just needed something to keep myself from shaking. From hope or anger or both. I wasn't sure which. My father looked down the street, then back at me. He said Todd came to their house a few weeks after the anniversary dinner. Alone. Said he felt misunderstood and wanted to clear the air. My parents, still raw from what I'd said, welcomed him in. Sat down. Listen. That's when things unraveled. Todd had a few drinks. Started talking, bragging really, about deals he'd made. Investments. A friend in legal who kept things clean. And then he slipped. Said something about moving money in a way that set off alarms even for my dad. Something about fake invoices. Some shell company. Todd laughed like it was just part of the hustle. My father asked him very plainly if what he was describing was legal. Todd said, define legal. He said it like a joke. But something in my father shifted. Over the next few days my dad started paying attention. Todd had always been vague about his business, but now that he was looking closely, it didn't hold up. The numbers didn't add up. The explanations were too polished. Too generic. He started asking around. Quietly. Through contacts from work. A friend who once worked in financial auditing. And what he found. He stopped speaking for a second. What he found scared him. My dad looked at me then. Really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Regret. I think I spent years believing money meant integrity. That if a man succeeded he must be doing something right. That respect followed wealth because it was earned. He shook his head. But Todd isn't just arrogant. He's dirty. And I think I let that man into our family because I was too proud to see it. I didn't say anything. He looked back at his car. I know I was wrong about Eric. I know I've been wrong about a lot of things. You tried to tell me and I wouldn't hear it. He paused. And I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed you to know, you weren't wrong. The wind picked up. A few dry leaves scratched across the porch. He turned like he was about to leave, then hesitated. Is Eric home? I nodded slowly and stepped aside. Eric came out a minute later, wiping sleep from his eyes. When he saw my dad he froze. But he didn't turn around. He didn't walk away. My father looked him in the eye and said something I never thought I'd hear. I owe you an apology. Not just for that night. For everything. You deserved better from me. Eric didn't say anything right away. He just stood there looking at the man who'd ignored him for 6 years. And after a long moment he simply said, "Thank you." That was it. My dad left quietly after that. No big emotional moment. No hugs. Just quiet. But something had shifted. Not everything was fixed. Some things never would be. But that night a crack in the wall was finally acknowledged. And once that happens nothing really goes back to how it was. We didn't rush back into the family. We didn't go to the next dinner or start texting every day. But the silence turned into space. And space, I've learned, can be healing. Eric and I still keep to ourselves. We still live quietly. But we live together. Not surrounded by people who half accept us, but in a home where we know what we're worth. And if anyone ever treats him like he's invisible again, I won't just speak up. I'll leave again. Because once you learn to say no to disrespect, no matter who it's coming from, you don't unlearn it.